Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will update the House on the situation in Afghanistan and our enduring effort to provide sanctuary for those to whom we owe so much. Since the House last met, our armed forces, diplomats and civil servants have completed the biggest and fastest emergency evacuation in recent history, overcoming every possible challenge in the most harrowing conditions and bringing 15,000 people to safety in the UK, and helping 36 other countries airlift their own nationals. They faced the pressure of a remorseless deadline and witnessed a contemptible terrorist attack at the very gates of the airport, with 2 British nationals and 13 of our American allies among the dead. But they kept going, and in the space of a fortnight, they evacuated our own nationals alongside Afghan friends of this country who guided, translated and served with our soldiers and officials, proving their courage and loyalty beyond doubt, sometimes in the heat of battle. The whole House will join me in commending the courage and ingenuity of everyone involved in the Kabul airlift, one of the most spectacular operations in our country's post-war military history. This feat exemplified the spirit of all the 150,000 British servicemen and women who deployed in Afghanistan over the last 2 decades, of whom 457 laid down their lives and many others suffered trauma and injury. Thanks to their efforts, no terrorist attack against this country or any of our Western allies has been launched from Afghanistan for 20 years. They fulfilled the first duty of the British Armed Forces to keep our people safe, and they and their families should take pride in everything they did. Just as they kept us safe, so we shall do right by our veterans. In addition to the extra £3 million we've invested in mental health support through NHS Op Courage, we're providing another £5 million to assist military charities who do such magnificent work, with the aim of ensuring that no veteran's request for help will go unanswered. And now the evacuation of Pitting will give way to Operation Warm Welcome, with an equal effort to help our Afghan friends begin their new lives here in the United Kingdom, and recognising the strength of feeling across the House about the plight of individual Afghans. Years before this episode, we began to fulfil our obligation to those Afghans who had helped us, bringing 1,400 to the UK. Then, in April this year, we expanded our efforts by opening the Afghan relocations and assistance policy. And even before the onset of Operation Pitting, we'd brought around 2,000 to the UK between June and August, and our obligation lives on. So let me say to anyone to whom we've made commitments and who is currently in Afghanistan, we are working urgently with our friends in the region to secure safe passage, and as soon as routes are available, we will do everything possible to help you to reach safety. Over and above this effort, the UK is formally launching a separate resettlement programme, providing a safe and legal route for up to 20,000 Afghans in the region over the coming years, with 5,000 in the first year. We are upholding Britain's finest tradition of welcoming those in need. And I emphasise that under this scheme we will of course work with the UN and aid agencies to identify those we should help, as we have done in respect of those who fled the war in Syria. But we will also include Afghans who have contributed to civil society or who face a particular risk from the Taliban, for example, because of their role in standing up for democracy and human rights, or because of their gender or sexuality or religion. All who come to our country through this safe and legal route will receive not a 5-year visa, but indefinite leave to remain. And our support will include free English courses for adults and 300 university scholarships. We will shortly be writing to local authorities and the devolved administrations with details on funding for extra school places and long-term accommodation across the UK. I'm grateful for everything they are doing, and of course for the work of my honourable friend, the Minister for Afghan Resettlement. I'm delighted but not surprised that across our country people have been fundraising for our Afghan friends, and we have received numerous offers of help from charities and ordinary families alike. And anyone who wishes to join that effort can do so through gov.uk. Mr. Speaker, our first duty is to the security of the United Kingdom. And if the new regime in Kabul wants international recognition and access to the billions of dollars currently frozen in overseas accounts, then we and our friends will hold them to their agreement to prevent Afghanistan from ever again becoming an incubator for terrorism, and we shall insist on safe passage for anyone who wishes to leave and respect for the rights of women and girls. Our aim is to rally the strongest international consensus behind these principles, so that as far as possible the world speaks to the Taliban with one voice. To that end, I called an emergency meeting of the G7 leaders, which made these aims the basis of our common approach. And the UK helped to secure a UN resolution passed by the Security Council last week, making the same demands. Later this month at the UN General Assembly in New York, I'll work with the UN Secretary General Guterres and other leaders to widen that consensus still further. We will judge the Taliban by their actions, not their words, and use every economic, political and diplomatic lever to protect our own countries from harm and to help the Afghan people. We've already doubled the UK's humanitarian and development assistance to £286 million this year, including to help people in the region. Mr. Speaker, on Saturday, we shall mark the 20th anniversary of the reason why we went into Afghanistan in the first place. The terrorist attacks on the United States, which claimed 2,977 lives, including those of 67 Britons. And if anyone is tempted to say that we have achieved nothing in that country, or still tempted to say, Mr. Speaker, that we have achieved nothing in that country in 20 years, tell them that our armed forces and those of our allies enabled 3.6 million girls to go to school. Tell them that this country and the Western world were protected from al-Qaeda in Afghanistan throughout that period. And tell them, Mr. Speaker, that we have just mounted the biggest humanitarian airlift in recent history. 8 times, the RAF rescued more than 400 people on board a single plane, the most that had ever travelled on an RAF aircraft in its 103-year history, helping thousands of people in fear for their lives, helping thousands to whom this country owes so much, and thereby revealing the fundamental values of the United Kingdom. There are very few countries that have the military capability to do what we have just done, and fewer still that would have felt the moral imperative to act in the same way. We can be proud of our armed forces and everything they have achieved and for the legacy they leave behind, and what they did was in the best traditions of this country, and I commend this statement to the House.
Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Prime Minister for an advance copy of his statement. The heroes on the ground of Operation Pitting are the best of us. The Ambassador stayed to process every case that he could. Paratroopers lifted people from the crush. Afghan soldiers continued to serve alongside us to the end. And thousands of others risked their lives to help others escape. They faced deadly violence and deliberately engineered chaos with courage, with calm, and with determination. Thanks to their remarkable efforts, thousands were evacuated, British nationals have returned safely to their families, and Afghan friends are starting a new life here in Britain. Speaking directly to those who served in Operation Pitting, I say thank you. Your service deserves recognition and honour, and I hope that the Prime Minister will accept Labour's proposal to scrap the 30-day continuous service rule so that medals are awarded for your bravery. The entire Army, our armed forces and veterans deserve proper support for mental health. The new funding announced today is welcome, but it's unlikely to be enough. Previous funding was described, Mr. Speaker, as scandalous by the Select Committee, and the Office for Veterans Affairs is still being cut. All those involved deserved political leadership equal to their service, but they were let down. They were let down on strategy. The Prime Minister underestimated the strength of the Taliban, despite intelligence warnings that rapid Taliban advances could lead to the collapse of the Afghan security forces, a return to power of the Taliban, and our embassy shutting down amid reduced security. The government continued to act on the assumption that there was no path to military victory for the Taliban. Complacent and wrong. They were let down, Mr. Speaker, by lack of planning. 18 months passed between the Doha Agreement and the fall of Kabul. Yet, as the Prime Minister now concedes, only 2,000 of the 8,000 people eligible for the Arab scheme had been brought to Britain. 2,000 of 8,000. A strategic review was published to much fanfare, but it didn't mention the Taliban, NATO withdrawal, or the Doha Agreement. And the Prime Minister only convened a G7 meeting on Afghanistan after Kabul was lost. Because of this lack of leadership, the government has left many behind to whom we owe so much. MPs in the last few weeks have had thousands of desperate calls from people trying to get to safety. Many remain in danger, including the Afghan guards who protected the British Embassy. In my constituency, and I'm not alone, members across the House will have had this, Afghans who applied for the Arab scheme weeks ago, sometimes months ago, who were clearly eligible, but weren't processed quickly enough by this government, didn't make it to the planes. And the stress levels of them and their families and all of our teams and caseworkers has been palpable in the last few weeks and months. A familiar and desperate story to many across this House, on both sides. The government doesn't even know how many UK nationals and how many Afghans eligible under the Arab scheme have been left behind to the cruelty of the Taliban. A national disgrace. Even if they could identify who they'd left behind, the government doesn't have a plan to get everybody out. Kabul airport remains closed to international flights. Safe passage has not been created to Afghans' neighbours. And whatever the Prime Minister says today, there is no international agreement on the resettlement of Afghan refugees. We have a Prime Minister incapable of international leadership just when we needed it most. I know it's uncomfortable. The terrible attacks from ISIS-K highlight the new security threat. The government must act quickly to coordinate international partners to ensure the Afghan government's collapse does not lead to a vacuum for terrorists to fill. And there's a desperate need for humanitarian support. The return to 2019 levels of aid spending is necessary, and where's the plan to ensure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands? Mr. Speaker, to those that have managed to escape Afghanistan and have arrived here in the UK, we say welcome. I know you will give as much to this country as you make it your new home. All you need is help and support. And I'm pleased that indefinite leave to remain will now be granted to all those who arrive by safe and legal routes. Local authorities across the country are trying to play their part, but they've been in the dark as to how many people they'll be asked to support and what resources they will have to do so. So we will look at the details. We will look at the details of the letter the Prime Minister referred to and examine the details. History will tell the tale of Operation Pitting as one of immense bravery. We are proud of all those who contributed. Their story made even more remarkable by the fact that whilst they were saving lives, our political leadership was missing in action. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there weren't many questions that the right honourable gentleman put to me. In that, he made the general assertion that the government hadn't been focusing on Afghanistan, but as far as I can remember, he didn't even bother to turn up to the first of the 3 statements I've given on Afghanistan in this House, Mr. Speaker, this year. I don't know where he was. Such were his instincts and such were his understanding of the importance of that issue. I can tell him, Mr. Speaker, that actually his figures are quite wrong. That before April we'd helped 1,400 people to safety from Afghanistan under the Arab scheme since April. In April and August the 14th, we helped a further 2,000. And then, as he knows very well, Mr. Speaker, between August the 14th and August the 28th, this country performed an absolutely astonishing feat of, yes, of course, Mr. Speaker, we are going to do everything we can to help those who wish to have a safe passage out of Afghanistan. And that is why we will continue with our international friends and partners to apply whatever pressure we can, economic, diplomatic, on the Taliban to ensure that they comply with that, Mr. Speaker, as they have said that they will. But, Mr. Speaker, I think the right honourable gentleman should, in all candour, acknowledge the immensity of the achievement of the armed forces of this country in planning and preparing for months for Operation Pitting, Mr. Speaker, and then, Mr. Speaker, contrary to what he has just said, extracting almost double the number that they are originally preparing to do. It is a quite astonishing feat. It is a quite astonishing military and logistic feat. And one thing I welcome, Mr. Speaker, one thing I welcome is his congratulations to the armed forces for what they did.
Tobias Selwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Veterans and families, indeed the wider public, are asking what was it all for? The country is back in the hands of a dictatorship, terrorism is once again allowed to thrive, and the people of Afghanistan now face humanitarian disaster. More worryingly, the limits of the UK and Western influence have been exposed, and with America now adopting a more isolationist foreign policy, we have passed the high watermark of Western liberalism that began after the Second World War. This is a dangerous geopolitical turning point. I ask the Prime Minister, would he agree there is now a void of leadership in the West and NATO? And if Britain wants to fill that void, as we should do, it will require a complete overhaul of Whitehall to upgrade our strategic thinking, our foreign policy output, and our ability to lead.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend deserves to be listened to with great respect on Afghanistan and for his service. He understands these issues deeply, but I must tell him that I think people listening to this debate across the country could be forgiven for not recognising that this country actually ceased military operations in Afghanistan in 2014. And what we are doing now is making sure that we work with our friends and partners around the world to prevent Afghanistan from relapsing into a breeding ground for terror, to make sure that we use all the levers that we can to ensure that the rights of women and girls are respected, and that everybody who wants safe passage out of Afghanistan is allowed to do that. That is what we're going to do, and we will continue to show the leadership that we have in the G7, in the P5, in NATO, and all the other forums in which this country leads the West.
Ian Blackford, the Leader of the SNP.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank all those that assisted in the evacuation from Afghanistan over the last few weeks, and can I thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of his statement. Mr. Speaker, normally we have a Cabinet Minister sent to the House to cover for the Prime Minister, but today we have before us the Prime Minister desperately trying to cover for a Foreign Secretary who should have been sacked weeks ago. During committee last week, the Foreign Secretary failed to answer even basic questions from my honourable friend, the member for Glasgow South. I genuinely hope that the Prime Minister is better prepared today. Mr. Speaker, there is barely an MP in this House who hasn't submitted urgent and sensitive information to the Foreign Office on UK and Afghan nationals desperate to find safe passage away from the Taliban. It is a disgrace that most of these urgent queries have been left unresolved and unanswered. A disgrace not for us, but for all those who have been left behind, UK and Afghan nationals, who are now fearful and in many cases in hiding. thousands of desperate people, people we have a debt of responsibility to, have been left with no clarity, no answers and no help. So let me ask the Prime Minister, what assessment has been made of the number of UK nationals left in Afghanistan, and what plans are there to assist them? How many Afghans that qualify under the Arab scheme as interpreters or in other groups who have been left behind? And will the Prime Minister apologise to those who have been left behind, left high and dry, those that the UK has a responsibility to? Last night, in correspondence from Lord Ahmed, the government gave the excuse that delays in evacuating all those with rights were because the Foreign Office had received more correspondence than during COVID. But, Mr Speaker, there is a fundamental difference. No one knew COVID was coming. The government had 18 months to prepare an exit strategy in Afghanistan. So can the Prime Minister give a firm deadline when the massive backlog of applications will be processed and provide a new target date for when safe passage will be offered to those UK and Afghan citizens? When Parliament was recalled, the Prime Minister publicly agreed to hold a four-nation summit on the UK's responsibility to welcome refugees here. Can I ask the Prime Minister to give us the date when that summit will take place? And finally, with all the talk of cabinet reshuffle, can the Prime Minister guarantee that the Foreign Secretary will finally be sacked in any reshuffle? Or does he intend to reward incompetence?
Always, Mr Speaker, happy to meet representatives of the Scottish Government and other devolved administrations, of course, Mr Speaker. But he asked some specific questions about the handling of requests from those still in Afghanistan. And those who've been interceding on their behalf. I can tell him that by close of play today, every single one of the emails from colleagues around this House will be answered. Thousands and thousands have already been done. And as for the question, Mr. Speaker, of how many Arab candidates are remaining, I can tell him that the total number is 311, of which 192 responded to the calls that were put out. And I repeat, Mr. Speaker, we will do absolutely everything we can to ensure that those people get the safe passage that they deserve, using the levers that I have described. But nothing, but the contrast, Mr. Speaker, should be readily apparent to everybody in this country, with the huge number, 15,000 people, that we were able to help just in the course of those few days in August. And I think people will understand that it was a very considerable effort by our armed forces.
Just to help the House, we'll be running this to around 4:45. Not everybody's going to get in. People will be disappointed, but we're going to do our best. So let's help each other. Theresa May.
I join my right honourable friend in commending all those involved with the Afghanistan airlift, and also all those of our armed forces who served in Afghanistan, sadly 457 of whom, as we know, paid the ultimate sacrifice. We should all be proud of their achievements. Does my right honourable friend agree that as a result of NATO forces withdrawing from Afghanistan, the terrorist threat has increased? And will he confirm that all those involved in counter-terrorism work here in the UK will be given the necessary support to ensure they can keep us safe?
Thank my right honourable friend, and I know how much work she has done in her career to protect this country and to assist in counter-terrorism. Mr. Speaker, I can give her note that we have no direct information as yet of any increase to the threat, Mr. Speaker, but I can assure her and the House that every effort will be made to make sure that our counter-terrorist agents have the resources they need to keep us safe.
Debbie.
Mr. Speaker, I've received hundreds of emails from constituents about Afghanistan, and I have British nationals in Afghanistan, a husband and his pregnant wife. Can the Prime Minister say what discussions the government has had with Afghanistan neighbours about keeping borders open for those at risk under the Taliban and to support refugees?
Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure that many colleagues around the House will be asking similar questions. I can tell her that my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, has been talking to the government in Pakistan and other regional countries about what we can do to assist them, as I've as I've described. And as she knows, we have, in addition to the ARAP programme, we have the Afghan settlement programme running up to 20,000 over the next few years.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I first of all pay tribute to the Prime Minister for his increased funding towards mental health care for veterans, and I'm sure he's going to keep that sum under review should it need to rise. May I ask him, however, if he'll draw the lesson that he's already learnt from the appointment of our Right Honourable friend, the Member for Louth and Horncastle, in having a single point of contact in the UK, and seek to have a single point of contact for those in Afghanistan who may need to access either the route of exit or support from Her Majesty's Government?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable gentleman. He knows whereof he speaks, and I've met people who've come from Afghanistan only recently who have helped us greatly in the last 20 years, and the key issues for them, as the House will understand, are where are they going to send their children to school, can they get access to the housing they need. I want to thank my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, for what he is doing, and he is quite right, Mr. Speaker, that my honourable friend, the Member for Louth and Horncastle, is the single point of contact that they should focus upon.
David.
Mr. Speaker, we all saw the horrific carnage outside Kabul airport. Over 180 people killed. So I join the Prime Minister in remembering all those victims, not least the 2 British nationals and the child of a British national. That airport atrocity was the work of the terrorist organisation ISIS-K. Everyone agrees we must now work to stop ISIS-K becoming a threat to the British people. Yet under this Prime Minister's watch, not only has he failed to agree an international coordinated strategy to take on ISIS-K, he has even failed to prescribe ISIS-K as a terrorist organisation unlike other Five Eyes countries. Will the Prime Minister explain these failures on national security?
I'm afraid the right honourable gentleman is in error. ISIS-K, ISIS Khorasan province, is a subset of Daesh. It's part of Daesh, and as he knows very well, one of the bitter ironies of the situation is, of course, that the Taliban themselves are no friends to ISIS-K, and whatever government there is in Kabul will need help fighting them.
Jacob.
Speaker, we are proving our immense generosity by supporting those in dire need in Afghanistan with safe passage to the UK. But our ability to do so is strained by the continuing uncontrolled illegal migration on the English Channel. What more can the government do to prevent it?
My honourable friend is completely right, and of course the issue is that very sadly, I think our friends across the Channel in France are faced with a very difficult problem of large numbers of people who want to come to this country, and we are doing everything that we can to encourage the French to do the necessary and impede their passage. But I know that my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is working round the clock to ensure that we not only encourage the French to stiffen their sinews and stop people making the journey, but we use every possible tactic that is available to us as well.
John MacDonald.
Can I ask the Prime Minister, raise a constituency matter with the Prime Minister? I've had over 800 Afghani local families contact me about their concerns about their relatives in Afghanistan, and we now have the thousands that are coming to this country, largely coming through Heathrow and being quarantined in about 7 hotels in my constituency. There's a real anxiety that on past performance of what's happened with asylum seekers in hotels in our constituency, they could be trapped in those hotels for quite a long time to come. What I'd like the Minister to arrange is for a meeting with myself and the relevant ministerial officials to discuss the plan for the support for those families, because I welcome, like everybody else, and my community does too, the support for those families, but also the long-term relocation plan to make sure that they have all that they can to settle here for the future.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the right honourable gentleman is right to draw attention to the issue. Some councils have responded magnificently, notably in the East Midlands and elsewhere. I know that my right honourable friend is putting, for CLG, is putting substantial funding in place, Mr. Speaker. But if he wants a further meeting, I have no doubt that the relevant minister will be only too happy to oblige.
Siobhan Ben.
Mr. Speaker, I am working with incredible Stroud constituents who are dedicating their time to helping Afghan families under threat. These people are in hiding. The Taliban have been going door to door looking for them. Border options are dangerous and constantly changing. They are absolutely terrified. Prime Minister, will you ensure and help me to show these families that they should not lose hope and help us as MPs provide timely and credible information about safe passage options?
Yes, of course, Mr. Speaker, and my honourable friend is entirely right in what she says, but that's why we're going to continue to put all the pressure that we can on the Taliban to ensure safe passage for the groups that I have described, and we're joined in that by friends and partners around the world.
Super.
I join with the tribute to our armed forces who have worked so hard. There are still people being persecuted and hunted by the Taliban because they worked for the UK government, but through contractors, not as direct employees. And they haven't had replies to their ARAP applications. And the rumour circulating is that they may have to wait for the resettlement scheme, but also that the places on the resettlement scheme many of them have already been allocated and that the scheme is almost full. Could he clarify the situation for those people? Also tell us whether some of the resettlement scheme places have been pre-allocated, and if so, how many? And say what will be done for those contractors as well as direct employees who we owe an obligation to.
No, I'm very grateful to the right honourable lady, and she raises an important question. I can tell her that the ARAP places, as it were, have not been transferred. They continue to be valid. People on ARAP scheme continue to be eligible, and nor is it correct, Mr. Speaker, to say that the initial budget of 5,000 for the resettlement scheme has already been filled. That is not correct either.
Dr. Julian.
Mr. Speaker, the Council for At-Risk Academics has been rescuing scholars in danger from oppressive regimes since the Nazi period in 1933. The Home Office has been sent a list of 12 such scholars, some of whom are in hiding in Afghanistan, some in hiding in Pakistan for lack of documentation. Will the Home Office make their case a priority because in them lies any hope for the future of Afghanistan?
Yes, well, there are many difficult cases, Mr. Speaker, but my right honourable friend is very... I thank him for drawing attention to these particular individuals who are at risk, and I'll ensure that the relevant Foreign Office Minister is in touch with him about the specific cases that he raises.
Rachel Baston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan and the region is growing by the hour. The famine is expected, and of course aid is going to be difficult to get through. So what specific steps has he taken already to ensure that that famine is averted, but also the region receive the international development aid it requires in order to avert a further crisis?
Right. I talked immediately, Mr. Speaker. I talked immediately that the crisis broke to UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres about what the UN should be doing, what the UK was going to do to support. And as she knows, the UN continues to be in country in Afghanistan, and we've doubled our humanitarian support, and we'll be working with friends and partners at UNGA and beyond to ensure that we tackle the humanitarian crisis as well.
Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly the last months has seen the shattering of many illusions, but does my right honourable friend agree that if we are tonight to help the people of Afghanistan, millions of whom are out in the open and will not be fed, we need to make sure that the whole international community focuses on doing so through the mechanism of the United Nations and probably through the traditional mechanism of a regional contact group, and that Britain, through its experience on these matters, through its membership of the UN Security Council, through its G7 chairmanship, is now in a pivotal position to help those people I mentioned.
my right honourable friend is completely right to raise the contact group in addition to the other forums that I have described, and to pay particular note to the role of the UN. And I know that my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, has just talked to Jean Arnaud, the UN Secretary General's special representative to Afghanistan. I think that the contact group is a vital part of the way we should coordinate our